So let's define this for people though, because
Sure.
when the word generative AI gets thrown around, it's very ubiquitous right now. You hear that tossed everywhere. And then you have a conversation with someone and you follow up and say, what do you mean when you say generative AI? The answers you get from people are very, very different. And a lot of folks I know have said, well, like Chat GPT. Well, I mean, yeah, that's using generative AI, but that is not generative AI. So when you talk about that, how do you define it for people?
So I think generative AI is best defined as any kind of artificial intelligence that is using machine learning and deep neural networks to replicate the way our neurons learn in the mind. And it can do a self-learning to learn different kinds of entities. And then it can, once it learns what the entities are, it can then produce them. So, like, for example, the transformer that Google invented, which is the basis of both Google's Bard, Google's generative search. Bard is running off PaLM 2, their PaLM 2 language model. So is generative search. Bing is running off of GPT-4. Yeah. Those are all transformer models which encode text, the meaning of text, the subject predicate relationships, and then they decode it into some other text. So basically, that's how generative AI works in text. But you can have generative AI in it's multimodal. You can have generative AI in any mode of communication. So images, so Stable Diffusion is the most popular open source generative AI for images. Midjourney is probably the most popular kind of commercialized product of although they claim they don't use Stable Diffusion. They're using different generative AI models, but they're probably the big ones to watch when it comes to producing jaw-droppingly gorgeous images. And then you have generative AI in music, and you have generative AI in video as well, which are quickly starting to come up in the ranks and be something that's viable. Video, the least of which. Music is starting to become quite viable. And the world's about to explode. We're going to have copyright issues. We're going to have legal issues. We're going to have crazy. It's the new web. It's like 1994 again, with anything goes, and just roll the dice and see what happens.
Yeah. So, okay. So on this one, because I think sometimes even when we look at this, people's mind get blown by what we're seeing today. So you look at some of this stuff, and if you're watching and you haven't played around with OpenAI or Google Bard or something like that, I'd encourage you to do it, because it is an extremely helpful tool. But when you look at some of this stuff, it can look like absolute wizardry. Mm-hmm. It really can go, wow. And I'm trying to remember which conversation I was listening to. I think it was with Mo Gaudat, who's describing OpenAI. And he's like, this is really only 2,000 lines of code that's really behind GPT-4. So in some ways, it's complete wizardry and completely complex. And yet in many ways, it's also extremely simplistic. Like when we think about the neural network, that it's like, well, this is technically one network. This isn't even necessarily multiple networks combined together. So with that, as you look at some of these things, where are you starting to see this stuff really? Because you said it's just going to take off. And I agree. The number of apps I even open up now and go, oh, they added an image generator into, oh, this tool now has an AI assistant to help me write this thing. Or where else do you see some of these things already starting to pick up?
So generative search is really good at classification. It's really good at learning what a cat is, what a building is, what a concept is, what's the synonym for this, what's a synonym for that. It's really good at producing text, not necessarily fictional text, but nonfiction. It's really good at producing in various different styles. It's really good at producing images. It's getting better at producing video. Video is really difficult for it to understand. If you look at the videos they're producing now, they're like nightmares. If you see some of the stuff that's going on now, it's both hilarious and terrifying at the same time. The way it visually looks on the screen, the reason why it takes so few lines of code is because all the intelligence, if you will, the crystallized intelligence in programming is done in the back end when they train the neural network on huge amounts of data. And this was really the vision of Geoffrey Hinton, formerly of Google, who's called the godfather of generative AI. Up to that point, the for like 100 years after Turing, Alan Turing, the field of computer science and AI have been trying to do symbolic AI and trying to do it in a completely different way. And Hinton was kind of a rebel on the outside. And he said, look at, if we have enough data and we have a big enough computer, we can push enough data through it and it will learn the relationships. There's a magic
Because
in
it's
the
great at
secret.
finding patterns and connections.
Exactly. There's magic in those patterns. And the reason why it just, we say it knock knock and it doesn't give us who's there is because we just haven't fed in enough of the data yet, right? And they're like, no, they couldn't see how you would get something from nothing. They wouldn't see how you could get those magical results from just text, right? But it's called the emergent properties of large language models, and Google's put a paper out on it. And yeah, the more data you put into it, the more it grows, the smarter it gets. It's like saying, well, the more seeds you put in the better soil, the more likely you're going to get flowers. So Hinton was proven right, and he used that kind of biomimicry model of the neural network and multiple neural networks talking with each other to kind of do a lot of the heavy lifting in the back end. And so the coding on top is light, and then the coding for us in terms of prompting. That's what it's called. Prompting is when you put the English text in, or whatever, French or German, whatever it is. When
Yeah.
you put the text in to get either an image out or a text out, it does look like wizardry. It has its limits. It has its benefits. Where I see it being used, therefore, is personal assistants. I see it being used in as co-pilots in software. Every app will have AI generating something. Societally speaking, AI is about to generate the majority of our content. And AI is about to police and consume the majority of our content. Not only can it produce, it can classify, it can consume, it can consolidate, it can curate, it can boil it down and explain. So
Yeah.
in big
Which
ways,
we're seeing this. I mean, I'm even thinking of examples where I've seen tools now that, they're actually really good. And again, go ahead and if you look at many of these tools that are popping up all over the place, you see this all the time where it's like, oh, it can ingest in a YouTube video and give you a, one-page summary of what
Mhm.
was in that hour-long YouTube video and things like that. So, and again, I continue seeing some of these apps continue to spark up, and it sounds like, I mean, we're only going to see more of them in that space.
For sure. I watch the space every week, and I check to see what's new every week.